you cannot say something about a start, because some people say, yeah, you have to do the start like that, or yeah, just go to the outside, but every start is different.
Every race start is different. You cannot expect to approach them exactly in the same way. And it's not just me saying it. Even young Max Verstappen from his karting days said the same. So as you can see, every start is different. We cannot approach them in the same way, you know, because you will never have exactly the same drivers in exactly the same position, in exactly the same track, you know? It's never gonna be the same. You will always have different drivers, you will always have different positions for the drivers, and you will always have different tracks, different track conditions, etc. For example, you may start once on the inside, for example, it could be turn P5, and you may have 4 really strong drivers ahead of you, or in the same row as you. They may be really strong, so you know that you can't be aggressive. You know, you probably most likely have to just try to keep your position and try to get past the drivers around the outside, because normally when you're doing a rolling start, you are gonna just get a benefit of being on the inside, and you gain 1 or 2 free positions because the row just picks up speed earlier, and they have advantage of being ahead of the yellow line. So you normally, when you are in such a strong field, when you start on the inside, most of the time you just gain the position in turn 1 by overtaking the drivers on the outside that started on the outside row. I hope that was clear. But when you are, for example, instead having drivers in front of you that are not so experienced, and they just found themselves there because of a good quali, you may approach it differently. So before you may have been conservative, now you can be aggressive. Even though you may start in exactly the same position in P5 in exactly the same track. So you may try to be a little bit more aggressive on the inside. Same story if you're on the outside. You know, in some cases, you may start P4, and you may have some really strong drivers on the inside of you, and you may know there's no chance to go around the inside because they would never miss a start. You know, normally when you're on the outside and you're doing a rolling start, you have a chance to go on the inside only if some drivers, as I say, they sleep. For example, if they leave a bit of a gap from the driver in front, or they just like don't get the perfect timing on throttle when the lights go out. So they may leave a little bit of a gap from the driver in front, and you can squeeze yourself into that gap, so you get from P4, you go to the inside, maybe you go up to P3, or maybe you go down one row, you go on P5, you go to P5, but at least you have the benefit of the inside, which is really much safer for the first corner, which is going to give you for sure one position by overtaking the driver on the outside, maybe even 2, and normally you are so much safer in terms of avoiding crashes than being on the outside. Because when you're on the outside, let's say you're starting P4, but you know those drivers, are really strong. Nobody's going to allow you the chance to squeeze yourself on the inside, to place yourself on the inside and try to go to the inside. But if you can't find the inside, you'll still be on the outside by definition. So if you know, okay, I'm not gonna get the inside, these guys are so experienced, are so strong, you try to find the inside anyways, but you can't find it, so you gotta stay on the outside, you're gonna stay P4, and you know, okay, you just have to hope and pray there's not gonna be any crash on the inside, because normally, remember that as a rule of thumb, anytime there's a crash at the start, it goes to the outside. So if you're in turn 1 and there's a crash, the crash goes to the outside. It's just the centrifugal force, you know, just goes to the outside. So if you're on the P4 and somebody's in P1, P2 and they crash and you're trying to go around the outside, you're gonna be collected most of the times, or you will have to avoid them and lose so much time. That happened to me in the World Championship last race in Franciacorta in the final. I was in P5 and, you know, the driver in front of me, P4 and P3, they basically collided. They crashed in front of me, and they went to the outside, and I was on the outside because I found myself on the outside for whatever reason. Like I was P5 basically, but it was almost like a P6. So I was like theoretically a P5, but because I started 6th and I couldn't find the inside. Like I tried my best, but I couldn't. So I had to go around the outside and hope and pray. But unfortunately, like there was no way for me to go. Like even if I waited 10 cards, I couldn't find the inside. It was like in case at one World Championship, the level is so high, you can't expect to find the inside. So I had to go around the outside. That was my only option. But two drivers crashed in front of me, and they just went to the side, and that was so upsetting because the drivers started behind me. They ended up finished P2 and P3 in the World Championship race in the final, whereas like the drivers right in front of me, like one row ahead of me, which was not one row, but one row ahead, because I was on the 3rd row and he was on 2nd row. My teammate Senna Van Walsten was able to win, but we were so close to each other in that moment when I had to avoid the crash. We were like 5 meters away or something. But then he was able to to end up and escape, whereas I was not, and I was parked there, and I had to avoid them altogether, and I had to go through the grass, and I lost all the positions. I was dead last because the grass was so thick, I was stuck in the grass basically, and I came out last. Oh my god. And yeah, so, but that was the thing. When you go on the outside, you have to hope and pray, that everything goes well. But again, if you're on the outside and the driver in front brakes really late, you can also brake really late. Let's say you're P4 and driver in P2 is braking really late around the outside, you can also make a dive bomb around the outside, and you can ideally get alongside the drivers on the inside, but the drivers, like say, you're gonna get alongside the driver in P3 rather than the driver in P5, I don't want to make this too complex, but basically, but if you have a driver in front in P2, because let's say you're both on the outside for turn 1, but he brakes super early, you cannot go anywhere else, you cannot go over him, you cannot take him out, you're gonna get a penalty. So you have to almost like brake the same place that he does, and so many drivers are gonna go by on the inside. And yeah, so in that moment again, you're almost like powerless. You can't do much, you're a bit of a victim of a circumstance. Next time, make sure you get a better qualifier. So there's so many nuances, there's so many situations that are deriving from every start. You cannot approach each start the same way. You have to use your instinct, you have to use your feeling. And of course, the further down you are in the start, so the more in the mid pack, the more difficult and more variables you have. If you're in the front, you start P3, it's much easier. It's much more predictable, because you have the driver in front. Let's say we're doing a rolling start. Let's use that as an example, as we kept doing. And just follow the leader, and you just make sure you don't sleep at the start, and you just stay with him on his bumper, and you just go through the first corner on the inside. You rarely would go to the outside. That would be like a suicidal move. Everybody would want to go on the inside. So if you give up the inside for the outside, it may work once or twice out of 10, but most of the other times you will fail from that. You will lose position, or you may even crash. So, but yeah, let's say that's easy. P1 is also quite easy. You just stay there, and most of the times you get a good start. You just defend for the first corner, and then you look yourself behind for the second corner. If you have a bit of a gap for whatever reason, you can open up. Otherwise, you have to stay defensive again, and then once the group spreads out, you start to do your lines and you start to drive normally. If you are in P5, that also is quite simple because you are on the inside, and you have only 2 drivers in front. You just go with them on the bumper, and you just go together, and you stay on the inside. And if the driver in front is opening up because he thinks he's going to go around the outside, you're going to go into him. If he just stays on the inside, you just stay on the inside, But the more you go down on the grid, let's say P15, 17, 19, the more variables there are. And so there it becomes quite complex. You will always find somebody trying to cut on the inside from the outside, and trying on from someone from the inside going on the outside, like maybe somebody gets a slow start, so you have to kind of avoid them. And so there's a bunch of different things that are going to go on, and I don't have a recipe for that. I don't have a recipe, and even Max Verstappen doesn't have a recipe. So you really have to use your judgment, your instinct, your perception, and yeah, it comes down with experience. The more starts you do, the better you get. You can't buy experience, so remember, just as a rule of thumb, try to keep the inside if possible. It's the safest, and of course the less risky, because you will avoid crashes most of the time, because the crashes go to the outside, and if you find yourself on the outside, you may be fine once or twice, but most of the times there may be some collisions. You just have to hope that everything goes well. And then remember, you have to understand and know your competitors. So if you have somebody in front on the outside that is going to brake really late to a brake around the outside, which is maybe the only option you have, okay, be ready for that and go with him. Because if you're on the outside and you brake early, you are probably gonna lose so many more positions that if you at least brake late, because normally that's the only option you have at the start. When you're on the outside, the only option you have is to brake really late on the outside, and hoping and praying that nothing is going to happen to the drivers on the inside, that they're gonna crash and they're gonna take. So I know it's a bit upsetting when you start on the outside, but there's nothing you can do. The next time, as I said, get a better quali. but yeah, remember that no stars are alike. Use your judgment. Don't listen too much to the people who are like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. There's some rule of thumbs, as I said. There's a bunch of rules. You should stay on the inside if you can stay on the inside. If you're on the inside, you should be on the bumper of the driver in front. You should make sure you have no gap so that nobody squeezes in. You make sure you're a little bit conservative in the first corner so you don't brake too late and drive over the guy. You know, there's a bit of rule of thumbs, but of course, all the rest is going to be down to judgment, and every start is going to be different. Everybody's going to be, and especially with standing starts with KZ, I see most of the times, you know, it's impossible to replicate the same start. Even if you start, you know, in WSK, there's some races in, for example, when in WSK, KZ races, when there are not too many drivers, let's say more like below 36, they just do manche 1, manche 2, like hit 1, hit 2, hit 3. They don't do A versus B, B versus C. It's rare when it happens, but sometimes it happens. It happened actually last week. I didn't drive. I was, you know, managing BabyRace with my brother and coaching the drivers. So I was basically watching the races from KZ. I wish I would be racing also, but I couldn't. But I could see they did the qualifying, and then they would start the same place for 3 hits in the same place they did in quali. So you would have 3 exact same starts with the drivers always placed in the same positions. But you watch the starts and they all look as if different, completely different. Sometimes one driver missed the start, sometimes one driver jumped the start, sometimes one driver, you know, got bogged down, so the others had to avoid, you know. Every time it felt different. It looked massively different despite being the same driver starting in the same positions for 3 times in a row. So yeah, there's gonna be events. You'll have to predict what happens. And yeah, just make sure you have good reaction times, you train your reaction times, make sure you look far ahead, and that should be fine. You should be good to go. And yeah, remember, don't be too stressed about it. Nobody's gonna get it right every time. Obviously, try to prepare yourself for that. You can do some visualization. I like to do it a lot. You close your eyes and you try to relieve 3, 4, 5 times before. Maybe you're in the cars. You can do that on the grid before the race, or you can do it in the trailer or in the tent somewhere where you're like alone and peaceful. You can try to stay by yourself and try to visualize the starts with different scenarios. I used to do it a lot, so much when I was in my prime years in karting. Now I also do it, but yeah, I mean, I think that is a good technique. Just visualize what the sorts of, but you don't want to overthink it, you know. You cannot visualize 100 different scenarios. You can visualize 3, 4, and then yeah, you have to just feel it. When you drive, it's gonna be coming down to your judgment, your experience, your feelings, your instincts.
If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you check this other recommended video below or watch the whole Driving Hacks playlist.